My name is John Countryman. I was a college theater professor for 38 years and I retired August 2016. Since that time, I've been working on developing a business I call Effortless Aging, Resilience in Later Life. And it is a three principles based enterprise. I became familiar with the principles starting in 2013 when Michael Neal published his book, The Inside Out Revolution. When I was still teaching, I was brushing my teeth one morning, leaning over the sink at a 90-degree angle so I didn't get toothpaste all over myself. And I heard something like the sound of a broken branch in my lower back. I tried to straighten up and I couldn't. And I experienced the most excruciating pain I'd ever experienced in my life. I had 3 herniated lumbar discs. And from that moment on, my life changed rather dramatically. The pain was not only severe, it was chronic pain. It was 24 hours a day. We tried spinal nerve blocks. We tried epidurals. We tried physical therapy. You name it, we tried it. And nothing could touch it. 8 years passed in which I was struggling with this pain. I was diagnosed as being clinically depressed because I had reached a point with the pain that it seemed like nothing was going to resolve the issue. At the same time, it's somewhere in that time period before I discovered the surgical solution, I was confronted with a challenge at work that in the state of mind I was in, I just didn't think I was going to be able to address and come to terms with. So the combination of those two things, as I saw it then, contributed to my depression. I had been someone whose mind was my work. Being a professor, I saw my mental faculties as being what, rather than brawn, it was brain, I guess, and I felt like I'd lost control of my brain in a sense, and that resulted in a panic on my part. So, and this is not uncommon that depression is accompanied by pretty high anxiety. I know now that my experience of the pain, my depression, and my anxiety were all experienced through the creative power of thought. I know that now, but I didn't know that then. So at the time, it seemed pretty hopeless, and I felt pretty helpless about it. I was just very, very fortunate eventually to learn of a procedure in which a transmitter was surgically implanted into my backside that then sent a signal to a laminate that was installed on the center of my spine. After my surgery, before I was going to retire, I began to look ahead to the possibility of having a second career because I knew that I didn't want to ever stop working. I didn't really want to retire. That just wasn't for me. And I had a friend who had done some coaching, and she said, why don't you give that a try? So I looked into it, and I found some coach training. I took a year and received what I would call traditional coach training, which was all about my learning strategies and techniques for helping clients, and then giving clients strategies and techniques to help themselves and so on. But in 2013, in the middle of the year, Michael Neal published his book, The Inside Out Revolution, and I began to see things very, very differently. So from that point on, I began to immerse myself in learning what I could about the principles, about Sydney Banks, about, by the principles, I mean the three principles, learning about, the early days of this understanding being adopted by a number of people, including people in the field of psychology and psychiatry. It was very transformative to me. If you talk to quantum physicists, they would say everything in the universe is energy. That energy exists either as formless spiritual energy or in form. We exist, ourselves, our own personal body, etc., is in the world of form. And because we're an organism with parts of our organism are there deliberately to let us feel sensations, including sensations of pain, because it's a communication system. Pain is a way of the body communicating, hey, something's not quite right here, so that you kind of become aware of it, pay attention to it, perhaps do something about it. All of that said, we can only experience the pain of our human form through the agency of thought, just like any other experience. And one of the things that we're coming to understand, and I think, truthfully, what they call pain management and the medical field is a multi-billion-dollar operation where people say, oh, you're in pain, here's a pill. And it'll numb it, it'll make it go away, or at least it'll make it better, it'll alleviate it to some extent. The question with physical pain, like anything else, is a matter of whether or not you know that the pain you're experiencing is thought generated or not. This is known fairly universally, even to people who aren't familiar with the principles. That under certain circumstances, if we're distracted or if our attention is elsewhere, that pain literally doesn't exist because it's not part of our thought. It's not part of our thinking in the moment. It doesn't exist. Now, that sounds pretty radical, but it's true. If a person's attention is placed elsewhere, that's what they're going to be experiencing, not the pain itself. If we know that the pain is coming from thought, it's possible to register the fact that, oh yes, this is being generated through my thought, and to direct your attention elsewhere so that even if there's some level of awareness of the pain, it's sort of like the difference between I would say it's a little bit like that innocuous music that you hear in elevators that nobody pays any attention to. It's just kind of a little bit of background noise, but not enough to divert your attention away from things that matter far more. So it's possible for a person to get to that place with physical pain, and it's not a denial of the physical reality of whatever is the source of that pain. I'm not talking about denying reality. We have a physiological immune system that if we experience injury or illness, that there are elements of our organism that immediately go to work to heal us, that it's a self-correcting process. Fewer people know that we have a psychological immune system as well, and that it is also self-correcting if we don't get in its way. We can compromise our physical immune system. We can compromise our mental immune system. And the way we compromise our mental immune system is, in a way, I would call almost a lack of faith that it has the capacity to change, to rebound, to self-correct, because that's the way it's designed. I have two examples of exactly what we're talking about at this moment, and one, both of them from Judy Sedgman. One recently, she's been working with some veterans over here in the States, and she was on her way to work with one of the groups one morning, and she realized that she had a tooth that was becoming very painful. And she thought to herself, well, I'm obligated to go work with these guys, and yeah, maybe a little bit painful, but I need to go ahead and do this. And after it's over, I'll go to a dentist or something and be able to do something about it. So she did that, and she went to the meeting with the vets, and apparently it was a very exhilarating experience that day working with them. She was, everyone kind of got into this wonderful space together, and she was thoroughly enjoying herself. And it wasn't until she got on the elevator after the session and she's going down the elevator that suddenly she realized that tooth was really painful all of a sudden. She'd completely forgotten about it during the time that she was in the meeting with the vets. The other thing she described to me was she had knee surgery not that long ago. And this is an interesting thing. You can appreciate this as a physician. That she had the surgery, and no sooner was the surgery over that they came to her and said, you're going to want to take these painkillers because you are going to experience a lot of pain. And and Judy's response was, well, I think that's kind of up to me. One, perhaps how much pain I experience, and also whether I want to take those painkillers. And the nurses, believing that they, in all good faith that they were doing the right thing, going, no, you don't understand. You're going to want to take these pills. Trust me, you're going to want to take these pills. She said, no, I really don't want to take them. If it gets to a point where I simply can't stand it, I'll let you know. So it was funny. She was laughing about it. She was saying, okay, nurses, let's let this be our little secret. You can tell anybody you want that I'm taking these painkillers, but I'm not going to take them. I don't want to take them. And she said, it really the pain wasn't that severe, and I'm sure that she attributes a fair amount of that to her state of mind. But isn't it interesting too that in the medical community if the medical community was familiar with the fact that a person's thinking is going to have some bearing on the level of pain, or the belief that they need to manage their pain, or the kind of knee-jerk assumption that, we need to give you something, we need to do something to fix your pain, so on, is all feeding a kind of conditioning that, this must be painful, I need to do something about it, et cetera, et cetera. I can tell you this for an absolute fact in my own experience. The device that I have that electrifies me, that addressed that severe, really excruciating chronic pain in my back, returned at one point because the device I used to treat that pain broke down, and the pain came right back. But this time I had full knowledge of the principles and the thought generated nature of my personal reality, and there was no comparison. It was like night and day. This time when the pain was there, I went, oh yeah, there's some pain there, I know it, but I was not nearly as disabled by it as I had been prior to my experience of the principles. It was just a part of my sensory experience at the time, and I knew enough to not let it become the full focus of my attention, or to begin to even think about going in the direction of, oh, this is depressing me, this is making me anxious, this is et cetera, et cetera. None of that. So just from my personal experience, I can say I've experienced the same pain at different times in profoundly different ways because of this understanding. One of the other things that had happened, as is often the case, is when I was experiencing the pain and the depression and the anxiety, was that my doctor was plying me with pharmaceuticals. So I had pharmaceuticals for pain, I had pharmaceuticals to help me sleep, I had pharmaceuticals for anxiety, and I had pharmaceuticals for my depression. I don't take any of those things anymore. And I don't have any sense that I need those things anymore. One of them, which was the anti-anxiety drug Xanax, resulted in a fairly dramatic withdrawal on my part, almost involuntary, because I was out of town. I ran out of them. I went without them for 4 days and began to experience some pretty profound withdrawal. And I decided that I never wanted that to happen again. So I just let it run its course until 3 months later, I felt like I had really sort of weaned myself off of that, which can be done once, I think, much more easily if you understand where your experience is coming from, that the reality that I was experiencing was thought generated. And this is also not to say that, that sensible treatment of pain with responsible and safe pain relief medications and so on, and other approaches to pain that people can take. Obviously, it's just common sense that you'd want to do that. You can continue to grow in this understanding from the moment you begin to really get it and really see it. You keep having insights, and consequently, you continue to become more aware and more conscious of the nature of the human experience, trusting to the fact that we have everything we need, that the wisdom that was our birthright is available to us at all times. And when we subtract all of the toxic thinking and busy mind and everything from the equation, it's very accessible to us. They may not all be earth-shattering insights, but insights are available at any time. And that intelligence that I spoke about, it appears, has become increasingly available to me. And that's a very exciting thing. Because on a daily basis, I find that I learn more about the nature of the human experience and about myself and about other people without even trying. Life has become a lot more effortless for me, and whereby I simply expect that I will experience the rest of my life with a great deal more grace and equanimity than was the case when I was suffering. I don't even think of myself as the same person anymore. I think of a sort of a before John and an after John. There's a tremendous difference between the principles that work in your life, but you're not aware of them, and the principles that work in your life and you are aware of them, and you understand that you're creating the reality that you're experiencing moment by moment. And so is everyone else. And no one else is experiencing quite the same thing you are, that all of us live in our own separate realities. And I guess another way for me to put this is that one of the things that really came home to me was the very profound realization that life is not personal. What I mean by that is it's not about me. Life is not something that is coming at me. It's not something that is happening to me, but it's something that I, through the agency of thought, are creating and then experiencing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that are the reality that is playing out in my life. I remember working with Cheryl Bond for a while I was training. She's a terrific person and a wonderful three principles practitioner who lives in New Hampshire in the States. And I was talking about I was going to be going on a three principles retreat in the Canaries. And I was saying how much I was looking forward to that. And I just knew that it was going to be a great experience and so on and so on. And she said something to the effect of, John, you could be crushed in the tube in London like a sardine and have the same peace of mind and the same joy in life and all the rest of it as you are sitting next to the pool in Lanzarote. It's all true. It's not just that our response to circumstances that we treat as unfortunate in our lives are outside in. All of it is outside in, even those things that we experience as, we say, oh, it really feels good to be, at the beach, Well, it's not about the beach. it's there's a correlation, sure. If it's a sunny day and the beach is beautiful and you're with friends and all the rest of it, there's a correlation there in terms of what you make of that, the meaning you bring to that experience. But you could be in that experience and be absolutely miserable. And in both cases, the place to look for where that experience is coming from remains the same. And that's the fact that at any moment, you're just experiencing thought in that moment. There's a big distinction between saying, well, I'm caught up in the contents of my thinking. Let's say my thinking is a little bit wacky. I'm thinking things that really aren't borne out in reality or in truth. They're not borne out in truth, but we all do that. George Pransky loves to talk about, everybody puts their crazy hat on once in a while. And so there's a big distinction between the contents of my thinking, which may or may not be something that I'm giving a lot of attention to, and the principle of thought, which is simply to understand that we think and that we are the thinker, and that all of our experience 100% of the time is the consequence of that principle of thought at work in our lives. That's turns out to be a very important distinction, because it's very easy to put all of your attention on the contents of thinking and how real consciousness through sense reports in one way or another make those thoughts seem real and seem to be representing to you a reality that is really actually very much the product of the ongoing principle of thought at work. So oftentimes we experience thoughts without even realizing it. We're experiencing things below the level of consciousness, but nonetheless we can know that we're having thoughts because we're experiencing feelings. Now, let me tell you, when I was experiencing the depression and anxiety, I felt like I was just one big bag of feeling, and I didn't like those feelings. They were painful to me at the time. What I know now is that those feelings were essentially optional. And what I mean by that, the reason I say essentially, is that all of us experience feelings, the entire spectrum of feelings throughout our lives. And there is no such thing as a feeling that's not attached to a thought. So whatever my thoughts were at any given moment, that's the feeling that I was experiencing. Feelings and the principle of consciousness make it appear that there's an element of truth to the way we're construing our lives. With an understanding of the principles, you can wake up from the dream that the reality you're creating is the reality, the single reality. You can wake up from that dream. But you can also wake up to the profound potential and possibility of what we generally designate as mind. That is the power of the energy and intelligence behind all things. We have access to all of that. Once I woke up to the fact that, this dream that I've been living in is just that, there isn't anything to do. And I think that's huge too, because even people I know continue to believe that they still need to do something to bring about the changes that are possible with an understanding of what Sydney Banks was about following his epiphany. And there really isn't. This gives me tremendous hope, particularly at a moment like this when the world really is focused on mental health. And some commentators would say that we have a mental health crisis, or we have a mental health epidemic in the world right now. And they may be right about that, but as I see it now, and I don't mean this in a glib or patronizing way whatsoever, we have a means to address mental health problems that is at our disposal. It's always been at our disposal, but most of us never knew about it. That's at our disposal now that can really be a game changer for people at the individual level, for the mental health profession, for mental health professionals, et cetera, et cetera. This is huge. The only other thing I would add, Anne, is that in recent months, as my work has gravitated more and more to working with an aging population, I'm a baby boomer myself, statistically, people who are aging are presumed by the medical community and by the mental health community to be more vulnerable to things like anxiety and depression and so on. And one of the things that prompted me to take my 3 principles work in this direction was that I observed that my parents had dramatically different experiences of aging. My dad saw aging as a catastrophe and thought about it a lot of the time. Experienced a lot of physical discomfort, was more prone to illness, including heart disease and so on. And even though he had what many people would think of as a good run, he passed away when he was 84 years old. My mother is 97 years old and still going strong, and she didn't have any of those kinds of experiences at all, because the way her own thinking, and she knows nothing about the principles, but the principles are at work whether we know it or not. And so she's had a very different experience. It's contributed to her longevity. But primarily, it's contributed to the fact that the quality of her life has been profoundly better than my father's was. And the variable in those cases was how they thought about their own aging. My father would spend a lot of time in rumination. He had no faith in the restorative capacity of our psychological immune system. So that's become in a way a kind of a mission for me, because I'll be working with people who are my age and older, primarily. And I'm excited about, in whatever ways seem most appropriate in each context, making a difference in that cohort, whatever name you want to call it, insight learning or 3 principles or the single paradigm, whatever you choose to call it. I'm very optimistic that it's going to make a big difference in the way in which the medical profession, mental health professionals, and anyone who works with seniors through the most elderly, it'll become more and more evident that this is something that can really make a difference. Aging itself is inevitable, and there are physiological changes that even in the best of circumstances are inevitable, but people can age well. people can age what I would call successfully. I even call it effortless aging, because even though there's going to be, because we are part of the world of form, physiological changes will happen. The mental experience of aging can be effortless. And I'm very excited about that. People will sometimes ask me, where do you send people for all of the qualitative evidence of the effectiveness of this, what you call the principles, or this understanding, etc. And there are places that I can send them. One place I can send them is to Ann Curtis's Facebook page, 3 Principles, 3 Sources, which I do. But I say, if you really want evidence of the impact of the principles on people's well-being, I start with me, because I am walking evidence of that.
So if people want to know more about you, or get in touch with you, or find out what you're doing, where do they find you?
It's very easy. They can just shoot me an email at Countryman Coaches. That's all one thing with no dots, lowercase letters, countrymancoaches@gmail.com.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that's going to help a lot of people, a lot.
I hope so. Yeah, I really do. Yeah. All right.
All right.
Well, if you ever want to know anything about the world of gerontology, just look me up.